AppInventor is a block programming language to help you learn the logic of programming. AppInventor runs in the cloud, which means you just need a browser and a connection to the internet to get started in creating applications. Here is the URL to get started. I will post this URL as a hyperlink in the assignment. When you get to that URL, you will be prompted for your Google account. So you do need a Google account in order to use AppInventor. Everything you do saves in the cloud on the server, nothing saved locally unless you decide to download it. So the first time you go in, you will be prompted for your Google account information. You do not have to create a Google account because your student email address is a Google account. So you can simply use that to access AppInventor. Okay, so here's a little splash screen to welcome me, and I think I will say don't show that to me again. And this is the interface for AppInventor, and this is a little application that I have on the assignment for you to try to emulate, or you can be creative and create your own. Over here to the left are components that create the user interface. These components are in the palette column. And you'll notice that they are broken into categories like layout and media. If you wanted to add sound or sensors, etc. We're going to start with the user interface because that's all we're focusing on, is getting used to using AppInventor, learning to build the user interface. Up above, you will notice that you have a menu for projects. So if you click on My Projects, you will see a list of the projects that you have created. The one I did as a test I called Stuff, okay? And you can delete projects here if you don't want them anymore, or you can start a new project. So let's try that. So from the My Projects page, click on Start a New Project. You'll be prompted for a project name. So project names can't have any spaces in it. So that's why I've got My First Project without spaces. So give your project a name, click OK, and AppInventor will then return you to that screen that we were on earlier. And the default beginning of a project looks like this. Some other things that you can notice is that an Android application could have multiple screens. So you can add extra screens. We'll learn how to do that later. And over here to the right, there's actually two different modes. And one is the designer mode. That's all we're going to be in today. The other is the blocks mode. And the blocks mode is where you're going to create the logic for your program. Let's go back to designer mode. So here's the user interface, and let me just grab a label. So a label is just a way to output text. Okay, so I'm going to grab a label and just drag it here. Notice that it automatically left aligned. So with this label selected, you see that it's called Label 1. Now, one thing about when you start programming these components is you have to use the name of the component. So let's say I have a label 1, a label 2, a label 3, and I want the label 3 to display the time, the current time. But I'm confused. Is that label 1 that should be displaying the time? Is it label 3 that should be displaying the time? So what we like to do is select over here your component, and label 1 is selected, and just rename it so it's a name that makes sense. So we could call this, say, if it was displaying the time, we could call it the time label. However, I'm going to call this the first hello label because that's what it's going to be, my first hello. As you continue to drag extra labels, and it'll just fall right below it, and here's my second hello label. And one more time, there's my third hello label. Not a very interesting application. It defaults the text in the label to text for label 1. So what I'm going to show you now is the very last column is the properties. Now think of properties as being a description, okay, or the adjective if the label is a noun. So think of the properties as being a description for this label. So you can change things like the background color, okay, or make it bold or make it italic. You can change the font size. Okay, you can change the font type. Leave it with the default, or the height, or the width. Okay, you can set it to 100%, so it would fill the entire label, and you can then center it. Okay, now the text is centered within the screen, or within the label, and I made the label go all the way across. And finally, you see right here where it says text, I want that to say hello. Okay, so hello. Now you can also change the fore color. Okay, with the label selected, you notice. So look around for some different. Okay, some of the different properties, play around with it to get familiar with it. So here's my second label. Okay, so I've added the labels and set the properties, and just use the example I did on the first one, and just add some labels and set some properties. One other thing that you can rename is your screen. If this is your only screen, you can leave it as screen 1. But if you're going to have multiple screens, again, when you change screens, it's easier to keep a name on the screen, to get a recognizable name for the screen instead of just the generic screen 1, and you can just rename it like that. Okay, so let's explore some other. Okay, so there's a button. Now a button looks a lot like a label, but notice that when I mouse over a label, it just looks like this. But when I mouse over a button, it gets, the mouse pointer changes to that finger, because this will then run code. So you click on it and it causes an event. It's called the click event for this button, and you will be writing code over here in that blocks editor for this button. Okay, so we can set some properties for this button too. Okay. So go ahead and design your screen, design your GUI interface. If you want to, you can add checkboxes or images, etc. Figure out how to set the properties for each of these components that you're adding. And when you're all done, then click on your snipping tool. And I love the snipping tool. So just type snipping right here to access your snipping tool. If you don't have it docked, I have it docked. So click on your snipping tool, and then click on New when you're done, and just get a screenshot. In this, what I want to see from what you've done is that you know how to get into AppInventor. I do want to see at least one label with your name here on it, and that you've added some labels or buttons. I'm sorry, mine was a button. Yours does not have to be a button. It could be a label or a text box, but see that you've added at least 2 different components, changed at least a few properties, and save this as an image. Okay, it will save as a JPEG file, and then you will simply upload that for your assignment. Hope you enjoy learning about AppInventor.